Hey, welcome back to the Hot Pursuit podcast brought to you by Lead Post. You work very hard to drive traffic to your website, so make sure that you're getting as much out of that traffic as you can with Lead Post. Get a free trial with no credit card required at leadpost.com. And today, well, I'm Roy Harmon. I guess I'll say that first. Today, we're going to be talking to Janet Ballonoff, who is the founder, principal consultant, and marketing strategy at Marketing Strategy Solutions. And we are going to talk about lead nurturing and how to make sure that the leads that you're working so hard to generate are not falling through the cracks. Thank you so much for being with us, Janet.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Can you sort of start us off just with an overview of how you look at the lead nurturing process and what that looks like?
Sure. I definitely look at the lead nurturing process from an overall, strategic component. As you said, we work really hard at getting leads into our pipeline. And especially depending on who those leads are and your industry, they can be very expensive to get the initial lead and the initial contact. And as I talk with, a lot of other companies, we're realizing, well, actually, it's been this way for a while, but people are really starting to understand that as much as we use a sales funnel uh, as a picture, it's not linear. The process is not linear. It's much more like a plate of spaghetti. People come in, they go out, they have different journeys, and you have different people in the buying committee who also come in at different points. They want different information pertaining to their role. So the lead nurturing really has to start with planning and a strategy behind it and how it fits in your overall revenue process.
Yeah, so I saw a HubSpot statistic recently, and it's hard to know how much to trust any of these statistics, but it's one that I've heard a lot of different ways from a lot of different sources, and it was basically it takes about 6 to 8 touches to really get to the point where you've really got a viable lead that's really going to potentially convert. And when it comes to that process of working them through the funnel, how granular do you get when you're breaking that down? Because I know a lot of people have, it's like 15, 16 steps to their sales funnel. And then the more traditional one that I think we're used to seeing from HubSpot is just, awareness, consideration, decision, and that's it. What would you say is kind of the best way to approach that?
So I tend to follow more of, the HubSpot formula where it's, really the inbound, 4-step awareness, consideration, decision making. But that's like a good framework in terms of what are the actual stages. How do you design content for that? How do you design a nurture campaign for that? But there could be multiple touches within that. Because like you said, it's anywhere from like 5. I've seen as much as 10. I think, some of it just depends on how complex your solution is, how integrated it is, something that's really going to run somebody's financials for their business probably takes more touches than somebody who's looking for, calendar, you know, integrations, right? Probably won't take as many touches. So some of it really just depends on the industry. But in terms of how granular you get, you have to make sure that you still have um, a certain amount of people. You want to make sure that you're getting what the real differences are, right? I mean, you can't really target one to one, right? So is it a chief financial officer at a company of 1,000 or more employees? They tend to have the same kinds of pain points, right? And is that a similar cohort versus a chief financial officer at a company with 500 or less employees, right? And again, depending on what the product is, those may all be the same, right? You might just be able to treat all CFOs the same, regardless of company size. So making sure that you're really getting just enough that you have the same pain points, but not so much that you're trying to really do one-on-one
And is there something you do to map that out when you're trying to determine, okay, we've got this we've got this group, this group, this group that are all going to be a good fit for what we offer. And then there's I guess an infinite number of ways really that you could break it up within that, but you need to decide, okay, we're going to have enough people in this
Mhm.
stage that it's worth it to create content for that. Is there any way that you break it down to make that decision?
Sure. So, there's a lot of different persona templates out there. So you can just, search up persona templates, get a matrix together of what that job title is, what their pain points are. And then you can also really, run that against your database, right? See who you have in your database, or use some different tools on LinkedIn. LinkedIn can, give you some idea of, how many people in the universe. I think at this point, pretty much everyone at least has a profile on LinkedIn. How much they use it or not is another story. But you could definitely use that to kind of gauge what that addressable market is. And there's, other database tools that you can go in and use as well.
Something that I think would be really interesting to do, because like so many people right now, I'm very obsessed with AI. I think it would be very interesting to develop a survey that highlights some of those things that you would use in a buyer persona and highlight some of those things that you might consider as touch points along the way.
Okay.
And then just feed those survey results, get that as a CSV, and then ask something like ChatGPT or Claude or whoever and say, what are some ways that I might divide this up?
Yeah, so they could definitely help you do that. I've had, some mixed results, right? It's always about how do you ask the question.
Mhm.
Um, right. In terms of, using it for prospecting, but it can definitely help you um create a little bit of that persona, right? Especially if you have a chat GPT, or if you have Plot, or you have something that allows you to put in a document and to put in, some of those knowledge base. You could say, this is my persona template, right? How do I then map the CSV files or a persona template?
Can you give us a little more detail on the how you look at the journey? Because there are, I think, a lot of different ways that people use the same terms. For example, some people they say awareness and they're talking about product awareness or brand awareness. They know who you are, but then some people say it's problem awareness, and they're aware that they have a problem. How do you look at that, and sort of how do you define each stage along the journey when you're working with clients?
Sure. So I definitely look at awareness in terms of problem awareness, right? And that's, sometimes that's a little bit challenging. People take a little bit of a different approach, right? Because not everybody wants to be told that they have a problem. Um, right. Um, but you could say, a lot of times you could say, hey, we work with companies that are similar to yours and they face, this challenge. Does that sound like something that you're doing? And then also like that fact that there's a solution out there, because I think sometimes people just like stay with a status quo because they're like, I'm able to manage it, I'm able to make my way through it. They don't know that there's a solution there for whatever that is, right? So it's acknowledging that this is a challenge that people have, and there is a solution for this. You don't have to do it this way. We can help make your life a little easier. And wouldn't it be great if you could, do this instead? So that's how I approach the awareness stage. And then really kind of that also like leads into some of like the consideration and the decision making, where then now that they know that there's a solution, they're going to start trying to see, okay, but what are those solutions? And even if you're the first brand that they encounter, now they're going to go and look and they're going to say, but who's your competitors? What's your competitors do? And they're going to start to do some of that analysis. So I think it's also helpful to address that and to be the experts in the field and to be more consultative about it, and help them, where we use a lot of like checklists. So a lot of times for marketers, I say, let's create a checklist, but let's make sure that when they check those boxes, like that matches our solution. right? So that when they start to use that, if they're going to use our checklist to compare, it helps, you know, it's not salesy, but at the end of the day, it puts us in a better light than somebody
Right.
else, right?
Well, and it's all about positioning, and
Hmm.
that's one of the great things about inbound marketing in general, is just that if you're able to establish yourself as that credible source and they're coming to you to ask what they should be looking for, well, you can tell them obviously you think these things are the most important, so you're not lying. You wouldn't have built your product or service the way
Right.
you did if that weren't the case. And it kind of leads them in that direction to where they think like you do, instead of just going out there and thinking however somebody else wants them to think.
Right. Yes. And then as we kind of get into that decision making, that's when we can like start bringing in more, details about the product. But also I say, from a marketing standpoint, we really want to lead with benefits and outcomes and how is this going to help you? Let that handoff, like when we do the handoff to the sales team, let the sales team get into like features and bells and whistles, right? Let's focus on the marketing side on benefits and outcomes and how we're going to help you do your job easier.
When somebody is looking at their current approach and they're trying to determine, maybe to do an audit of what they're doing currently, what are some of the components that they should be looking for to see if they're checking the boxes that they need to be checking for an effective lead nurturing campaign? What are the components that you feel like are necessary when you're building a campaign like this?
So I think it's always important to start with your goals, right? So I always use like the SMART goals, right? So they're specific, measurable, they have a time frame, right? So you know what your goal is, you know how you're going to measure that, you have an idea of what success looks like. You can't really create a plan until you know what that plan is trying to achieve. And I think it can't be overstated, really start with your goals. A lot of companies that I work with just skip over that step altogether. They're ready to just get started, right? And they don't know why. They don't know how we're going to measure it. And if you don't know how you're going to measure it before you start, then you're not going to set yourself up. At the end of it, you're going to say, oh, but what about this? And then you'll go back and realize, well, you can't measure that because you didn't really bake that into the plan. And now you're missing a data point that's important to you. So it's definitely always start there. It will help so much just to get that planning underground. And then we talked a little bit before about making sure you know who your personas are, right? Not just the demographics, but really understanding what their pain points are. So then you can write the content that you need. And then also really building it and understanding what your sales, process looks like. If you're going to use the awareness, engage consideration or however you're going to define that, make sure that you know how that is and really create that matrix of the content that you need aligned with personas and aligned with your buying journey terms and really map out and make sure that you have the content. I think that's the next big piece is sometimes organizations don't really realize how much content they really need to have in order to get a nurture going. Because, you know, it really is a nurture if you can like set it and you have everything built out. It's much more difficult if you think you're gonna like put pieces in as you go. Because we're all, in marketing, we're all busy, right? We all end up with a day where we end up having to put fires out, right? And the next thing you know, it's 3 weeks down and you were supposed to have this content in the nurture and now there's a break in your nurture. And that really hinders it. You need to make sure that you have everything set and ready to go so that you can maintain that consistency.
Those, I think those you've mentioned two of the biggest problems that people have when they're getting going in inbound and lead nurturing. And the first one, which is just not having goals set beforehand,
Mhm.
I think is one that can be harder for the marketing team to address, because a lot of times it's that maybe they can't get the dev team on board to actually get things implemented that they need implemented. I feel very lucky to have the things that I need are able to get done immediately. But a lot of people, they don't have that, or there's so much of a focus on go go go, just be doing things, that they don't have the time to implement
Right.
those things. But the other problem, which is not having a clear idea of the personas that you're targeting, I think is more related to, it's more because of having a sort of not really understanding how to go about doing that. Uh, so is there something that, how do you work with clients to help them start to figure out those personas? Because we've all seen kind of like these very, not very useful personas where
Hmm.
it's like they give a name, it's like Sally CEO, and it's got a couple of little blurbs, and maybe they've got a fake picture. Uh, but what's the information that they really need to have, and how do you typically go about getting that information?
Um, yeah, I think, yeah, a lot of times people do, they spend a lot of time like making something that's like PowerPoint ready. Right. And it looks pretty in a presentation. But then when you go to use it, it's not as useful. So I really think about like what are those demographics, right? Who is the product trying to help, right? So you need your end user. I mean, starting from that. Who's the product trying to help? What are some of the titles? What are some of the industries? And, depending on your industries, they might have slightly different titles, right? So if, you're trying to do something like in the software, they might have more like what we consider something like the standard business titles, like a CFO or a CMO or a sales director, right? But if you're looking at some more of the healthcare fields or nonprofit organizations or government organizations, they might use slightly different terminology in their titles. And so making sure that you understand those and you're creating those titles. And then also really understanding what are the challenges and what are the pain points. And then identify, and I do a lot of like spreadsheet work because I can like move it around and really like play around and put the pieces of the puzzle in the right places and streamline what those pain points are. And then what are the benefits? What are the outcomes that they would try to want to get out of this? If those pain points are solved for them.
Got it. Yeah, that's good information. It's one of the things that anything that really involves understanding your customer, maybe getting some survey data, it typically tends to be one of the things that's a little bit harder for people, just because it can be difficult to even get customers to respond, but you
Yeah.
get such a great benefit from doing that, that it's definitely worth it. What about the actual content formats or the types of content? That's something that it's changed a lot, especially with AI. I feel like so many different kinds of content are being created just at such a level that you can't get to something good in the midst of all the just terribly
Right.
written things. And so I think a lot of people don't even look at blog posts anymore. And I don't know how many people are downloading ebooks. What are some of the formats that you've seen are effective, whether they're new or just old things that still work?
Yeah, I think especially with AI, making it so easy to just churn out content, right? It is harder. People really want to read, from other people. They want to learn from other people. You need to make sure that, you're giving information that somebody can't just type the question into, ChatGPT himself and get that answer. So from that aspect, I think that blog articles still have a place, but it just raises the bar in terms of having to write it and to be more human and to really give people experience about like how to do something or what have you experienced and making sure that people you resonate and you're really speaking to them. I've seen a lot more in terms of the social media channels, right? People are going to their communities, whether it's on LinkedIn or through chats on Reddit, Discord, right? All of these different communication channels in order to really talk, person to person, and being able to do that, which makes the social media and the social media listening that much more important. I think webinars, podcasts, a lot of in-person networking events are starting to come back. And I think it seems like people are starting to do a lot more regional, localized events. Since, coming out of the pandemic, people want to come back into person a little bit, but people aren't necessarily going to like fly halfway across the country anymore to go to a networking. If they can, hop on the car or hop on a train and get there pretty quickly, then they'll go um, and be able to have that networking. But I think anything that really brings that human connection to people, right? That's what people are.
Yeah, and when it's one thing that's easy in a way, maybe not easy uh, in some other ways, is when it comes to written content where they can't see that you're not some robot.
Yeah.
I think that when I read things that are obviously like a robot did not say this, whether it's some kind of a personal anecdote or something that really creates that authenticity, which may get harder and harder to do as AI advances. That's what I'm looking for, because it really, it's kind of like when a salesperson calls you, nobody wants to talk to a salesperson. And
Right.
so if you call somebody and you don't sound like a salesperson because you're not like, hey, how you doing? Then you're going to get a little bit further. And nobody wants to talk to a robot either. So when you're a lot of these little quirks of chat GPT where it's, in conclusion, and all these
Right.
little things that it does, these little idiosyncrasies, if you can avoid those and add in
Yes.
some elements of authenticity, that's much better. And another thing that is very important, I think, for any of the content that you're creating, and it's really something that I think we've been hitting on for the whole episode, sort of beating around the bush maybe a little bit, is just how important personalization is, because everything in inbound really is about personalization. It's about
Right.
who are you talking to and what context are you talking to them in. I saw on I think it was Statista. Yeah, there's something like over 40% of consumers, they value they want to have personalized content. And if you don't do it, they're willing to go to another brand uh, if it is doing personalization better. So it really does matter to people. And how do you feel about personalization? How important have you seen it to be, and what are you doing to make sure that you're hitting that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it is really important, and it really goes to the context, right? It's beyond, being able to put their first name and their title and their company, right, into a little like form in the email, right? How many times do you get a subject line that says, "Hi, Janet," right? "Hi, Roy," or like whatever, you put into your LinkedIn thing, right? Then I know that, right, they've just like downloaded my LinkedIn and
Right.
right? I'm like, no person would really do that. But it's the content, right? And the HubSpot inbound methodology has, a term that they use for, conversational, right? And what that means really is you need to continue the conversation. Um, and nobody wants to repeat themselves. They don't want to say, "I'm so and so, I work here. This is my primary challenge," right? It's like, even if you like call like tech support, right? You get the first person, you're like, "Hey, this is me. This is the problem that I'm having." They're like, "Oh, I can't fix that. I need to escalate you," right? And you get to the next person, and it's like you have to start all over again. People don't want to do that. They want you to know, like, I already said that. I know I'm talking to a different person, but don't you guys talk to each other, right? So you know that, right? And don't, if I'm already a customer, don't try to sell me the thing that I already have.
Right.
Right. So I think it really is about that context and making sure that you know who they are, how they fit within their journey, how they fit within your company. Um, and there are a lot of systems out there in order to make sure that marketing, sales, and all of your internal departments, support, everybody is able to see that data and they're able to get that context. So really making sure that you're using that so you can continue the conversation. And your prospect, your customer feels like you know who they are. I do put in a little caveat on there because in the era of data privacy, they want you to continue the conversation, but they don't want to feel like they're being stalked. So you
Mm.
do have to walk a line a little bit, right? You know.
But really, so much of what you're talking about is really more substantive.
Hmm.
It's because when you think about somebody who they know your name, they put the little personalization token, and so it's got your name in there. Or for
Hmm.
me, I I had something sent to my kids once, and so now the autofill for me is always my kids' names, and
Right.
so I'll get something that says, "Hey, Roy and JJ." I'm like, okay, I know what happened here. Uh, but that's that nobody really cares that much if you know their name. But what you're talking about is you're talking about knowing their situation. You're talking about
Hmm.
knowing the things that are bothering them uh, as is relevant to what you offer. And not only is that more impactful, but it also is less creepy because
Yes.
there are some things that you could say. I read somebody had a funny LinkedIn post where they were talking about using Chat GPT to personalize their emails, and it sent out an email to somebody who had just been to a funeral,
Oh
and
no.
it made that like part of their thing. I don't know how it worked it in there.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe it was like, you know, hey, are you dying to have some help with your marketing or something like that? I don't know,
Right.
but
Right.
that's where you can get into some issues. But with this kind of thing where it's like it just doesn't feel personal in that way that you want to protect your person.
Hmm.
It's more things that people are more comfortable with.
Right. Right. Whereas, if that was, a prospect for a customer, that you've talked to for a while, and they had mentioned to you that they were going to be out, or they sent you the email that they were going to be out, you can check in with them on a more human level, right?
Right.
And just be like, hey, I just want to see how things are going. You're back in the office, right? If you're ready to do this, right? And check and use that, right, but in a human way, and with the understanding of, don't like be like, oh, hey, so how was your time off? I hope you had fun, right?
I saw you went to the beach. Took some pictures of you from the hotel across the street.
Yeah.
So uh, the personalization element is, I think, the most important one, and an area where um, just most people are still not doing it or not doing it well. Like 80% of companies are not, and it's going to get easier though with technology
Hmm.
and AI and all these things. So for people who actually want to get a leg up, now is the time, because this is an area where they can get in there and start making some real inroads to where once everybody's doing it, they've already gotten a benefit. They're ahead of the game. But a lot of people, they don't have the time, or they don't want to take the time. They've got other things. But really, I think that you could just find somebody who knows how to do this. Get them to come in, audit your current approach, and get this stuff implemented. And even if you don't update it for, I would think it could last a long time. You can have a system in place that is going to is really going to work well. And is that the kind of thing that you do at Marketing Strategy Solutions?
Yeah, so a lot of what I would do, I think, because people don't have time for the planning. So it takes a lot of planning, right? Especially if you want to try to automate, right? And help the systems talk to each other, right? It's making sure that you have that information. I work with setting up nurtures, and whether a nurture is going to be based on helping people through the buyer's journey and navigating them through that, or some organizations, if they have multiple product lines, might want to set it up more along product line or more along persona role. But a lot of it is really based on having the right data in your database and having it structured, so that the automation tools are able to really use that. So if you want to be able to send and nurture based on where people are in a sales pipeline, you need to have some way of identifying that information. And that could be anything from, they downloaded this piece of content, which we've tagged as being top of funnel. Or, they've now engaged with this piece of content, which we've tagged as, a middle of funnel type of content, and helping people move that. of course, I mean, how we determine that inside the organization might be totally different from where the person really is. Um, but there's some different things that you could do in that. Or if you have an opportunity, you know that there's an opportunity in there, being able to put that data into a field in the database. So a lot of it is making sure, okay, if we're going to move people along this path, right? How do we identify that? Do we have something in the database, whether it's a field or we're able to see their activity in order to know where they are? Um, and then do that. And make sure that it does stay updated that way. So I think a lot of that planning doesn't get done. And being able to bring in somebody who can help do that planning and really look at that and make sure that the foundation is laid is very helpful.
And what kind of companies in particular do you typically work with?
So I tend to work with small to medium sized businesses, generally in the tech space, more specifically with some different SaaS companies. Um, but I've worked both, with hardware and software technologies. I tend to work with organizations that have a little bit more of a niche audience that tends to need a little bit more fine tuning, a lot more strategy towards finding that right ideal customer profile. And that just takes a little bit, I don't know, smarter marketing is what I call it. So really making sure that you're finding the right person that is the best fit for your products.
Smart goals and smarter marketing. I like it.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciated having you on the show, and those are some great insights. Is there anywhere people can go to continue following you and to find out more about how you think about these things?
Yeah, absolutely. You can look me up, Janet Ballonoff on LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn profile. I put together a newsletter there, so you can find me and subscribe to my newsletter. Also, you can take a look at marketingstrategysolutions.com. I also have a shorter mssresults.co/blog. So you can take a look at those.
All right. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.